Good evening, everyone. This is Holly Pike from ArtisticThreadworks.com and YouCanDigitize.com with Generations. Thank you for coming. And tonight we're going to talk about creating motifs, creating stamp patterns, creating pattern fills, and building blocks. And answer some questions that I've received this week about building blocks, what you can and cannot and should not do with building blocks. So I welcome your questions as we go forward. So let's just go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, let's talk about motifs. Excuse me. Motifs can be very stitch intensive. And if you look at our motifs, I'm going to go ahead and let's do a circle. We'll do a circle. I'm going to select it with a right click and hit my spacebar. This is where, for the new people, this is where everything dealing with stitch properties and object properties happens. Okay? I'm going to scroll across, and this is all your stitch types, to motif. Up here, there's a tab for every stitch type. Now let's just go pick one. I have one of my favorites here. It's here somewhere. There it is. I'm going to pick this motif. The motifs tend to be very tight, and by that I mean really tiny and very dense. So they tend to add lots and lots and lots of stitches. I'm going to leave the defaults for this one and let you see how it looks with the defaults. So once I select it, I'm just going to click OK. And you can see that at the one-to-one view, it's pretty dense. It's pretty dense. It's 7,493 stitches. Well, if you were doing a design, a 4x4 design, and you still had other things to add, your design very, very quickly is going to get up above that 8,000 stitches recommended for a 4x4 and really stretching over that 10,000. I usually say 8 to 10,000. Much beyond that, you're going to have puckering, you're going to have weird things happening. So this is going to get you up there pretty quick. So what I do is I'm going to right click to make sure I get that running marquee around it, hit my spacebar, go back into the motif tab. I'm going to make it bigger. There are two ways to make the motif bigger. One is here by changing the X, which is the horizontal, and changing the Y, which is the vertical. If you had trouble remembering which is X and which is Y, which I always did, I remember it by saying, "Why are you so tall?" So that reminds me that it's the tall one. It's the vertical. You can change the direction, so what direction it faces to stitch it, the repeat times, the column spacing, the row spacing, and the offset. The offset means, are they perfectly in line or are they off a little bit? Okay? You can preview it right here. I don't particularly like this preview because it doesn't give you a close enough view to really get a good idea of what you're getting. So I usually just say okay and look at it. If it's not right, I go back in here and make my changes. So you can make your changes here. Or if you're kind of like me and you don't like dealing with the numbers, I'm going to open up the layout panel by clicking on layout panel. And this is where I think motifs are really fun. If I want to make the motifs bigger, as I hover over this little red square, I get those resize boxes. I can now make my motif big. If I hover over this one, I can make it big horizontally. Now, if I drag these boxes to make sure nothing is overlapping but just touching, I can do what I want to do with the size and all that instead of having to put in numbers. You can watch the sizes change so you know what's happening. You can also manually do the offset. So if I left click on this box, I can offset it like that. If I left click on the bottom box, I can offset it like that. If I left click, hold, and drag the corner one, I can rotate. If I left click hold and do a little bitty circle, I can rotate it on itself. When I'm done, I'll hit close. You can see preview what's going to happen, and now I'll click OK. You can see how that motif has changed. And it's considerably less stitches because now it's bigger and you have empty space. Okay, so remember, motifs are very, very dense as a general rule because they use lots of stitches to make the motifs. Any questions? Okay, what does the use simple mode mean? Well, let's take a look at it. If I click use simple mode and click at watch your stitch count, 3448, it reduces the stitch count.
Excuse me.
It reduces the stitch count. I will almost always use simple mode because it does reduce the stitch count. It eliminates all the back and forths. But let's watch it stitch. We might not like how it stitches. I don't know. I'm watching to see if there are any scissors that show up for clipping or if it does anything strange. Sometimes with motifs, if you have odd shapes, it will like clip here and then go over there and jump. So you really have to watch them sew on the screen to see what they're going to do. Motifs can be very tricky, but they're also a lot of fun. And you just can't take them seriously. Okay, don't take it too seriously. Okay, I'm going to go back in there and take a look. And I have crop with border. If I uncheck crop with border, watch what happens. Okay, it's kind of uncontrolled. Let's go back in here and say crop with border. And say okay. Any questions on that part? Okay, in this instance, Jeannie's asking, is the motif on top of the complex fill or in place of it? With this one, we started with a complex fill and changed it to a motif. So this is instead of, in place of. That's in place of. Okay, so that's the standard motif. You can make as many as you want, add as many as you want to the software. Okay, so I'm going to take this guy and get rid of him. Now, let's make a motif. We can make a motif using the line tool. Okay? I'm just going to make that little house. I hope I do this right. I failed 5th grade math, so this is hard for me. Okay? So there's one. You notice it's 275 stitches. But how about we use this little insert stitch tool and we do the same thing. And hit enter. Now let's see what we've got. We've got 9 stitches as opposed to 275 stitches. Okay. Big difference. Would I do this with just 9 stitches? Probably not, because it would be maybe too large, and maybe not. But let's save them both and see what happens to the motif when we save them in terms of intensity of stitches. So I'm going to select this one and copy, open a new document and paste, just so we have 2 separate documents. Okay, so this is the one with only 9 stitches in it. I'm going to right click to select it. A motif has to be all connected. Okay, so you can't have a piece over here and a piece over here and a piece over here. It has to be something that is completely connected, merged, one piece. Okay, let's go up to accessories and motif, slide over to save a motif. Well, here I'm going to make this say HP house-9. So I know that one was the 9 stitches. Okay? And I'll click save. Close the program. And here's our other one. This one's 275 stitches. So let's right click on it, accessories, motif, save motif. And let's make this say HP house-275. So we know that's the 275 stitch one. And click OK. Well, now we're done with our little figure. So let's go ahead and open a circle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the motif into this circle, just like we did before with the other circle. We'll hit our space bar, we'll slide across to motif, go into the tab, and now we'll look for HP and house. There it is. Not sure which it is. Okay, that's the 9 one. I want this one. I want the larger one. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to change the layout, except I am going to use simple mode. I'm not going to change the size. I want you to see just what happens with the default. Okay, that is the motif. If you look at it closely, you can see that it's a house. Okay, but there's 28,958 stitches. Okay, all right, let's open another. Actually, let's do this. Let's copy and paste this guy. Move that over. Because what I want to do, I'm going to turn this back into a complex fill just for the purpose of the exercise. Okay, now let's go ahead and hit our space bar. Go back into the motifs, into the tab, and let's look for the other one.
The first and triple run, Liz says.
There it is. Is that the 9 one?
Holly, your first one has triple stitch. Okay.
So will this one. Maybe. Okay. Now I'll say okay. Look at the difference. Let's change this. No, there is no such thing as triple stitch with motif. Okay, this one has 1,500 stitches. That's a good point Liz just made. Let's do this. Let's go into our motif and open it. Let's pull that one in and make sure that it's a single. Let me copy and paste. Doesn't make a difference. See? Still 275. Oh, wait. I lied. Okay, good. It's 144 stitches. So let's save this one just to give you a real clue of what's going on. Motif and save. I'm going to save it as the other one so that I don't have two. Okay. Okay, good catch, Liz. Liz said that it was a triple stitch rather than a single stitch. So let's change this back. I love my team. I love it when they catch things. Okay. Let's go up here and get this guy. All right, but still, look at this. There's 10 times more stitches. There's 15,000 stitches. See what a difference the triple run made versus the single run. But now there's 15,000 stitches versus 1,500 stitches using the insert line. Now someone might say, well, but Holly, the insert line or insert stitches doesn't put tie-ins and tie-outs. Well, let's see. Let's get real big. see our stitch points. Okay. Right here, it's locked in well enough. Right here, it's locked in well enough that we're not going to lose those stitches. So let's go find our out real quick. And here's our out. And it's going to be locked in well enough. And everything's touching when you do motifs. Everything is touching. So it's not going to be a problem to use the insert stitches. What did I do to reduce the stitch count on this one? I remade the motif using a single run versus a triple run. That reduced it to 15,000. Here, I used insert stitches to create the motif as opposed to the line tool. I would not use a triple run on a motif. I already fixed that. The left design houses are a little crooked. That might add stitches. I don't think so. I don't think so. But let's look at this one. Go into the motifs and let's change the size. If I click on this little chain link and I change one of these numbers, they're going to change proportionately. When I go into the layout panel now, I need to make it so that they are not overlapping. That makes density as well. You think these are going to add stitches because they're crooked? Okay. Use simple. Okay, so now that dropped us by another 5,000 stitches. Okay, let's do the same thing with this one. We made that 8. Was it 8 or 7? 8. Okay. I'm going to change this to 8. Let's take this and make it so that they're just not touching. When they're touched, it's like having a multiple layer of density, so we don't want them to touch. So we're going to say use simple mode. Well, now we're down to 949 stitches. So you need to be careful, and these are overlapping, by the way. I notice with this layout, you need to have the box. See the little red box here? You need to have the box not touching or not overlapping. Okay, even less, 652. And that's enough to see a motif. If you really want it this dense, then just come over here to the layout panel. Just open them up a little bit, by making them a little further apart. Okay, now we're down to 6,300 stitches as opposed to 652. It's roughly 10 times the amount of stitches. Okay, motifs are awesome. You just have to be careful with it. Larry, are you answering the questions? Deb, it will be fine in the recording. It will be fine in the recording if it's lagging. Insert stitches, Jean, is this tool right here. When you select that tool, these are actually stitches that you're putting in. Okay? They're stitches. Individual stitches. Each time I click, it's a stitch. So if you see, that's 9 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I use this for motifs. I don't really use it for much else, but I use it for motifs. I might use it for shading, but then that's a whole different thing, and you'd have to make sure that you're locking everything in. The motifs kind of overlap and take care of the locking in on themselves. Okay, so any questions about creating a motif or why there is a definite difference in the look, surely, between creating using insert stitches and using the single run. I don't really care for this look because I'm going to show the stitch points here. This has tons of stitch points. That's where the stitch count comes from. It's kind of a artificial stitch count density, but this is going to be very thick. It's going to take a long time to stitch as opposed to this. They're the same size, but look at the stitch count. Let's measure it. 5 millimeters. We're within our range of what the machine can do. You know, if you want to use the single run, you could probably use the single run and then just change your stitch length so that the stitches aren't quite as far apart, but not quite as close either. So if you made a line, went into your stitch properties right here, you can see we can change the length of the stitches. If I wanted to make this 0.4, you need to change the top one as well. I'm not sure, you might have to change them equally. Doesn't always get the result that you want, but I'm not a big fan of these the stitch length adjustments. But you can see that they're further apart than they are here. Okay, you can always do that. You can change your stitch length. Any other questions about how to make a motif? No, they'll be okay. The stitch, that's why I measured them. They'll be fine. Okay. It's the only thing I use the insert stitch tool for. Now you could, if you're concerned about the length of these stitches, well, when you make your house, when you make your motif using insert stitches, use more stitches. Use more stitches. Not a problem. So that then if it does get bigger, you don't have an issue with the stitches being too long. If you're more comfortable with that, make more stitches. Still going to be a whole lot less than 150 or 275. They will connect themselves, Sandra. When you use them as a motif, they connect themselves. Let me show you. Let's make a line. Escape, hit the space bar. Let's go over to Motif, into the Motif tab. Let's select that one and just say OK. It's pretty close together, so let's stretch it out. Let's stretch them out like that. Notice how they connect. They connect. That's the whole point of the line motif. It's going to connect itself. They will never be separate from one another unless you bring them in separately and work with them that way. Is there a way to edit the stitch length in the house on the left? You could edit it, but I would probably rather change the stitch length. I would change the stitch length. Would changing the stitch length adjustments make it a weaker stitch? No, it would not at all. It would not at all. It would probably make it stronger because they're shorter together and closer together. Okay, any other questions about making a motif? Can you change the way they connect, like make them change at the bottom? Great question. Oh, one more thing. When you're trying to select a line motif and you try to go up here, which is normal to try and click on a line, go, oh man, I can't select that. Select it in the film strip and you'll see right where the line that we created goes. That's where you need to click to select it. Okay. Can we change? Well, now we got them kind of in the middle. It doesn't like to be changed much. The most you can change is this, where the in and out is, so that you don't get the line through the middle. If you bring this out over here, you're going to get that line through the middle. So no, you cannot change where they connect. Okay, that is a motif. Now, let's use the same thing as a stamp pattern. So what I usually do is when I make a motif, I think, there's going to come a time when I want that as a stamp pattern. So I make my motif, then I come up here to Accessories, Motif, and Open. I find my motif that I made, like this one, and I click OK, and it shows up on my screen. At this point now, I'm just going to select it like we did last time. Go up to Accessories, Stamp Patterns, and Save Stamp Pattern. And we're going to call it HP House 9. I'm going to name it the same because it is the same, and click OK. Now that that's done, let's go ahead and open a new document. Let's make a square this time. I'm feeling like I want blue. Now let's apply the motif or the stamp pattern to this shape. There are stamp patterns and there are complex fill patterns. Complex fill patterns are what you get when you make a normal area. Using the area tool, you get a complex fill. Well, let's look at stamp patterns. I'll hit my space bar and I'll put a check mark right here in stamp patterns. This box opens up. Okay, put a check mark, the box opens up. Let's look for that stamp pattern that I made. Oops, that's my test one. It should be alphabetical. There it is. And I'll select it. This looks just like the motif page, or it should to you look just like the motif page. I'm going to move it and make it kind of like a tall house. And maybe separate it just a little bit. This works exactly the same as the motifs. You can click this and change it all the same, or you can stretch them and play with them here. You have a preview. It's going to show you what this pattern is going to look like. The only thing you don't have is that extra layout panel. You do it all right here, which I kind of like. I kind of like not having to click on another box. Okay, I'll say OK and OK. And now you can see the stamp pattern. Let's change the stitch angle a little bit and see if we get, there it is. Changing the stitch angle will do all kinds of things to your design. Again, you're up here to 6,800 stitches for about a 2 by 2 square. That's a lot of stitches. So you use them sparingly. You use them for effect. You use them for texture. You use them to perk something up, to make it stand out. You don't use them on a whole design. The biggest thing that I see as an educator is when new students learn stamp patterns, they go and everything now is a stamp pattern. And every little area of a design is a different stamp pattern. and then you have 55,000 stitches and it's breastplate armor, and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I miss in the explanation? Well, what I missed was these are not to be used for entire designs. These are to be used sparingly because they really kick up your stitch count, and this will be dense. Whereas the motif was kind of artificially inflated because it was making the little houses. This will be dense. What is actually happening is everywhere you see the dot, the needle goes down. So that's why so many stitches. The needle goes down and it puts a hole in the fabric and it alters the fabric. So you have 6,829 fabric alterations. Okay, so keep that in mind. Stamp pattern questions. Can you make any adjustments on the motif border setting, such as? Any questions on the stamp pattern? Well, let's go back in and look at what happens when we change some more things. So it's already larger, so let's raise this one. And just kind of offset. This is an offset. When they're not lined up underneath each other, that's called an offset. You can put that in manually, or you can just move them around until you get them where you like them. I like to just move stuff around. I'm kind of visual that way. Okay, let's see what happens now. Changes the house now, doesn't it? Changes the look. The other thing that you get with stamp patterns is you get a lot of these like satin things here and then complex. You get a lot of unpredictable things to happen. So you want to be very careful when you use them. See what happens when I change stitch angles? Everything changes. You want to be careful with them. They're a wonderful tool, but you do want to be careful. Now this is not sitting on top, Jean. This is actually, let's watch it stitch. How about that? Let's bring it up to about 200 and go into the stitch viewer. And let's watch this stitch. Here's the underlay. Now watch what happens. It's stitching the design and it's stitching it right into the complex fill. So it's not on top, it's just actually stitching it into the fabric. Can you sort of see it here? So this is a complex fill that we changed to a stamp pattern. It's in the actual stitches. You can see it's actually stitching it right in. How do you keep the stitch count down on stamp patterns? Use them sparingly and space them out a little bit. Like I did, it dropped the stitch count 2,000 stitches. I would never use them on a really big area. I would never use them on a really big area. You might use them like on a little Santa hat or a scarf or shoes or a belt or little places. You're just going to have issues if you use them on big areas. And if you work with me and in the apprentice group or on my team, I'm going to send them back and say, no, do this again because that's not what we do. Adjust the motif border to change how the houses are connected. Question. In response to that line of questioning, you moved on now. Adjust the motif border to change how the houses are connected. You can't. You cannot change how they are connected. Did you have another question, Elaine? If so, type it in. Can you stamp just one house the size of your design? Huh. You could probably emboss it, I would think. I don't know. That's a great question. Hey, team, any of you know if you can do that? Just stamp one the size of your square? I've never tried to do it, so I don't know. Why is that not changing back? Okay, let's go and take a look here. Can you stamp just one? Let's find out. Let's go to accessories, stamp patterns, and open. Let's see if it'll let us do it. Does anybody see the house? There it is. Where is it? Yeah, oh, okay, here it is. I don't think it's going to let me do that. I don't think it's going to let me do that. Anybody do that? Has anybody done that? Yes, Jean, it becomes part of the complex fill. The difference between stamping and embossing. Embossing is you do it freehand or using these tools over here. Stamping are pre-existing shapes, if that makes sense. I wonder if you guys ask great questions. I wonder if I made this can't see it all. Okay, I'm trying to move it so that I can just get one on my pattern. That's a great question. I've never done that, so that's a great question. I guess you could move them like that. You certainly have to play with it a lot to get it where you wanted it. Yeah, that doesn't work real well. Anybody on the team ever do that? Choose it as a stamp pattern and make it the middle one large enough to fill the square. That didn't work. That's what I was thinking, Fran. You could use you could bring in your stamp pattern. Bring it in. Where'd it go? There it is. You could bring it in like this. Make it the size that you want it. Like that. Select the area that you want to make it stamped into. Turn on embossing. Pick up your line tool. Oop. Okay, hit generate, turn off embossing, get rid of that, and there's your house. Remember though, with embossing, that the stitch angle plays a huge role in how much detail you see. See how this one's really clean, this line, and this one's not? So you need to kind of play with the stitch angle a little bit to get a happy place. But you could do it that way. That's kind of what I was thinking, Fran. If anybody has a better idea, just, shout it out. Yes, Jill agrees with me too. Okay, I would like to see some motif borders that you could use as outlines for a different look, such as stem stitch for a hand stitch look, if you get the time. Okay, we'll take a look at that. What if it was column 2 inches wide? I mean, and you wanted to stamp them individually? I would just use the motif line. If I'm not clear on that, let me know. Exactly. You would just make an emboss, Linda, but you would use your stamp pattern literally as a pattern. Okay, so that's a stamp pattern. Use them sparingly, use them judiciously. I would highly recommend that. Someone is asking about using different motifs for borders. It's pretty easy. I'm going to make some circles. I'm going to choose my circle tool, and right over here, I'm going to click on this complex fill thing, and maybe I'm not. Interesting. I thought I could do it, but I can't. Okay, let's just make a circle. Then I'm going to go to View Outline Icon, right-click on the gray, create an outline from area edges, and let's make it a motif border, and say OK, and generate. Now I'll just get rid of that center, and we have different things we can look at. That's the standard. That's the standard. 900 stitches, that's not a lot. But you can really use any motif in a circle or as a border. Let's take our little house. Let's take this one, go into the layout panel. Let's try that. Now we have our house kind of upside down. But you can work with this and get it so that it will do really whatever you want it to do. Okay, there's your houses all in a row. Now I would suggest that you move your ins and outs to be either opposite each other or get them so that that line disappears. Just keep moving them around till the line disappears. So there's our little house as a motif border, which is really, it's kind of cute. Does that answer your question for motif borders? A stem stitch. Okay, let's look at the stem stitch. Okay, motif. I made a little stem stitch that works pretty well. And I changed the settings to, I think it was 3 and 2. Moved it together and made a stem stitch. Well, let's make it bigger. Let's make this 5. Or you can go over here and instead of using a motif, make a blanket stitch use a double, can leave it at 2. I'm going to put these at about 30 rather than 90. And then let's offset by moving that guy. And that makes a pretty stem stitch type border. It would make a great border for a monogram. It definitely would. 3,700 stitches, that's kind of high, but not too bad. Jenny, does that help? Okay, so that's motifs and stamp patterns. Now, what about pattern fills? I know we've gone over this in other webinars, but let's just touch on it. If I want to make a new complex pattern fill, I'm going to select it with a right click, hit the space bar, go into the complex tab, select a pattern. This new box opens up. As you click through this box, watch the changes over here. As these checks go in here, that means how many rows of stitch patterns you're going to have in your pattern. See how they change? And these values here are how far this slider is moved along the line. So let's go down here to a random one. They're very easy to make. See, I have lots of them in here that I've made. They're all just a little bit different, and they all look a little different when you use them. So let's just use that one for now and say OK. And you can see how it looks. Doesn't look like what it did in the picture, but has kind of a cool look to it. Okay, so let's hit the space bar, go back into our complex tab, go back into select pattern, and let's just make a new pattern. Okay, let's just make a new pattern. I'll use the first one because it's pretty much a generic pattern. And right over here is something called random. Watch these numbers change as I click on random. You can see the pattern change here. Numbers change, pattern changes. So these are random. You don't know what you're going to get, but as you look at it, you might say, oh, that's kind of cool. I think I'll use that. If you uncheck these, it changes the random pattern. So how about we use this one? But before I use it, I'm going to save it. I'm going to click on Save, and I'm going to say HP Random 1. You can name it whatever you like. And I'll click OK and OK, and it changes the pattern to that. Moving your stitch angle changes everything. Okay, so now if I want to go back in here, I can find my HP Random 1 right there. See, when my niece Mary used to work for me, she made this one. Digitizer's Apprentice, we made those and these. The Digi Weekend made this one. It's a little different. Those are complex fill patterns. You can manually do this by raising the numbers here, manually like that. You can slide them. Once they're checked, you can slide them however you want them. So there's a pattern, and I'm going to save it because I might like it. Random 2. Okay, there's a new pattern. Be careful again of your stitch count. Some patterns can be very stitch intensive, and again, just use a little bit of common sense when you use them. So now again, if I go back in here, I'll have random 2 right there that I can use again and again and over and over and over and over forever. You see, I've got lots and lots of stitch patterns in here. This one's not mine, it's part of the software, but it's an oldie but a goodie. Okay? Questions on stamp patterns? Yeah, Jenny, it's all about playing with the software. I recommend for most people that you're in your software every day. Even if it's 15 minutes, if you only have 15 minutes, it's kind of like doing a workout. You know you should be exercising for 30 minutes a day, but if you don't have time for 30 minutes, take 15 and make that 15 count. Learn something new. Play with stitch types, play with patterns, play with making a stamp pattern, play with whatever. Make that time really count, and you'll find that your digitizing skills will increase exponentially if you do that. Any other questions on motifs, stamp patterns, or complex fills? Would it be possible to make circles in stamp patterns? You mean, I'm not sure what you mean, Linda. You mean to make it be circles here? I don't think so. Unless you can figure out these numbers to make it look like a circle. I don't know. Might be able to get, I don't know. That sounds like a pretty big package to figure out. I don't think so. I think I would just emboss that if that was the case. You can just keep moving these numbers to get them the way you like. And then you get that. I would just emboss them. If at this point you wanted to emboss, you could now take your circle and you can move this to get kind of a circle thing in your stamp pattern. You could do that. There's no way to make circles that I am aware of other than to emboss. Nope, no circles. They are straight lines because of the nature of a fill. When you do a fill, you're going back and forth like this. There's no way to really do a circle. If you're doing satin, you can bend it with the curve, but there's no way really to do circles without having some type of an indent here, like the embossing line, if that makes sense. Any kind of a fill you would have that would be a circle would have to be a stamp pattern. You could do just one big circle like that and have it be a stamp pattern of circles. You kind of would need to be creative. There you go. You can make a motif pattern in a circle to make a circles in a stamp pattern. I would make it in a stamp pattern and then just keep playing with it until I got it to where I really wanted it. I've never had a need, but it's the nature of the complex fill. Any other questions or comments about stamp patterns, complex fill, or motifs? I've had lots of questions about learning how the motifs work and things like that. So this should cover that. Now, I do want to talk with you a little bit about building blocks. I've had some questions, and the most asked question is there a size limitation to what you can save as a building block? And is there a number limitation as to how many building blocks you can save? Both of which are very good questions, and my answer is going to be no to both. There is no size limitation that I know of. I would imagine it would be based on if your program crashes or not. I'm not sure why you would want to save something that big. I'm sure somebody could come up with a reason why, but I don't have a reason why. And as for how many, I probably have thousands here, starting with just my own blocks. I got all these blocks in here. You can open this up. Did you know that? You can open this up if you're looking for something. And the bonus part about building blocks are you can be working on a design and say you have this little acorn thing that keeps repeating in the design. Okay? Gotta get back to my generate button. You have this little acorn that repeats in every single design in the set. Well, why would you redigitize that 10 times or 20 times if there's 2 in the set? Just do it, make it a building block, do your first design, stitch it. If it works, now you know that every time you use this, it's going to stitch correctly. I don't recommend doing a whole set and finding out this doesn't work. Ask me how I know. Okay? If you're going to be using building blocks, I would recommend you make the building block, do your first design, or take the little pieces and put them all in one hoop and stitch them. Make sure they work. It's like this. I did a design set where that was in every single design. They were all over the designs. I made this little guy. I saved it. I exported it. I stitched it. It stitched great. So I said, okay, now I know. I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I need to use that little motif. Or this. Or that. Here it is again with leaves. I did not digitize that twice. Now, when you create them, I think I'm trying to remember what the file format is. I think, are they MNG like the backgrounds or something like that when they're in here? But once you drag them, let's say take this one. Once I left click hold and drag it up here, when I drag it up there and generate, it now becomes a gen file, just like your designs. But here's a whole teapot, an applique teapot that I did. It's a whole set of applique teapots. So I made one set and then put the different things in there, and my job's pretty much done. So building blocks are awesome. If you have something like, I have this design set where I do these word block things. Let me close that. And I'll just take a small one, generate. There's my frame. So now I could have it say, and I'll copy and paste this one, move it over here, and I'll line everything up. So I know that that's going to stitch 100% every time because I've stitched it, and I know, I have this little spider web. If I want to do a Halloween one, I can put it in there and do that. I know that all these stitch, ornaments. So building blocks, I highly recommend that you start building your building blocks. Start finding little things that you think would make good building blocks or you might want to use later in the set. And start making your building blocks. If you want to make a new tab here, generally you would use My Building Blocks to store them. If you want to make a new tab, right-click on any tab and say Add a Page. Little box will come up. I always put HP and name it what I want it and say OK, and it appears over here. Okay? If you want to hide it so that you don't see it, you can just say, you know what? Just hide this page. I don't want to see it. Or you can say delete the page. Poof, it's gone. You're not going to see it. Okay? Questions about building blocks? Okay, Jill just made an interesting comment. She said, to change how the motif connect to each other, it will depend on where you start your first point. If you start the house on the bottom, it will connect them on the bottom. I did start it on the bottom. I started it down here. I started it right there. I'm not sure that's right. Okay, with thousands of building blocks, how do I keep them organized? Just like this. I make new tabs for each different thing. Okay, so this one is pumpkins. So I have a build a pumpkin set. So I had the pumpkin, and I have eyes, and I have noses, and I have mouths. And I can build a pumpkin to do whatever I want to do with it. So everything is organized for me in groups for how they what they are. Maybe they're pumpkins, maybe they're teapots, maybe they're seasonal stuff, snowflakes and things like that. Maybe they're penguins. Pencil toppers. I made a set of pencil toppers for my friend Ina, who has grandkids. So she said, Holly, will you make me some pencil toppers? I don't have any. I said, sure. So I made a freestanding applique pencil topper. Oops, that's not one. And so now all I have to do is drop in the different holidays and we're good to go. I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Okay? I can put any holiday in there that I want to put in there. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. I can put anything I want, save it as a gen file, export it, stitch it. I know it's going to be good to go. Okay? Let's see, what else do I have? I have patriotic, nothing in there. Miscellaneous stuff. I have some lace things, some lace base. If I want to do a quick Christmas ornament. Okay? I want to do a quick Christmas ornament. I can do them because I have these saved. You can see these are pretty stitch intensive. One of them is 7,000 stitches, and that's without anything on it. I know that this works because I've stitched it. I've rinsed it. It holds together. I'm good to go with it. Okay? That's the purpose of building blocks. Make your life simple. Is anybody having trouble hearing me? One person said they had trouble hearing me. Audio's cutting in and out. Catherine says, if you have to resize, do you have to retest? Boy, I don't want to say this on a recording. But let me answer that question when we turn off the recording. They save as MNG, Maria says. How much can you resize a building block? Wow. I resize them a lot. I resize them a lot. If I take something that's big and make it really small, I absolutely do a retest without question. If I use it the exact size that I saved it, I may not do a retest of it. Is there a way to make the new tabs in alphabetical order? That's a great question. That's a great question. I think they automatically go in alphabetical. Let's see. Button, borders, buttonholes, candles, corners, deck buttonholes, HP app frames, ball jars, birds, bits, butterflies. They automatically go in alphabetical order. If they're not in alphabetical order when you add it, Once you close the program and reopen it, or close building blocks and reopen it, they should be. I don't know why this guy's over here and this guy's over here, but that's all right. I don't know of any way to change these. Can't drag them. No, I don't know of any way to make them alphabetical. I'm missing something here. I don't have hundreds of tabs. These are all my tabs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 32. I have 32 tabs. Because these guys over here that don't have my initials are standard with generations, and I usually turn them off because I don't like to accidentally use something of theirs in a design set. It is all about how your brain is organized and how you want to do it. You could do it based on everything, all applique stuff, all Halloween stuff, all seasonal stuff, all Christmas stuff. However you want to do it, however you can organize.
You might want to mention that in a little more explanation about other people's artwork if you're doing commercial digitizing.
Oh yeah, Larry makes a good point. The comment that I made about these building blocks over here, which are the generations building blocks, these are all very cool and they're good and you know they're nicely done. Wouldn't that look pretty on there? They're nicely done. They belong to someone that created them. Okay, so before you use anything in the building blocks that doesn't have your name attached to it or my name attached to it if you're on my team, you need to ask Generations if you can use them for a commercial purpose, like to make a design and sell it, because they belong to them, and I'm guessing they're going to say it's for personal use only. So if you buy building block sets from Generations, they're for personal use only, I'm pretty sure.
What about when you have some from Design Studio?
When you have some from like another company, let me see if I can find one like this. That's an artwork of a wine glass. Technically, that belongs to that company. Since we buy licenses for artwork, and if I wanted to make a new design with this and this guy here, I could do that because I have a license for the artwork. You should credit it and say where the artwork is from. You should. That's the best way to handle it, because they could come back and say, hey, you know, you use that artwork and you didn't give me a credit. So it's good if you can name them so that they're named by whoever's art they are. You know, like I use DS for Design Stitch or Clip for Clip Artopolis. It's just all in the, you know, what is appropriate for copyright. Yeah, I don't know if they can be made alphabetical. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm still here to answer questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you enjoyed motifs, stamp patterns, complex fills, and building blocks tonight. Great information. Remember, use these things sparingly and be very, very judicious with how you use them, because they can make your stitch counts go up very high and cause a problem for you. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.